1940. The skies over Great Britain burned. As the London Blitz turned nightly raids into a daily terror, and the Luftwaffe employed low-altitude tactics to evade radar and flak, the nation's defenses found themselves critically vulnerable. Anti-aircraft guns couldn't track fast enough, and fighters often failed to intercept the swift bombers slipping through the darkness. The war, at this moment, demanded expensive, complex technology, but the country desperately needed a cheap, tireless, and versatile defense. The problem wasn't how to shoot down planes, but how to change their behavior. The solution, as so often happens in total war, was absurdly simple. It wasn't a new fighter, nor a complex radar system, but a humble balloon, filled with hydrogen, tethered to the ground by a steel cable. This is the story of the Barrage Balloon. A mockery to German pilots, yet a deadly trap for any who underestimated its power. We'll delve into the ingenious low-tech engineering that created an invisible, yet impenetrable barrier at 5,000 feet, forcing German pilots higher and making them easy target. The climax of this story came in 1944, when barrage balloons became the last line of defense against a terror that couldn't be stopped by conventional means: the V-1 flying bombs. This is the definitive story of how simplicity conquered chaos, and how a silent, stationary, gas-filled shield became one of the most effective defensive assets that saved London. By 1940, German pilots had perfected the art of low-altitude penetration. Flying close to the ground, they exploited the limitations of Britain's early radar systems and effectively skirted beneath the firing zones of heavy anti-aircraft artillery. This tactic dramatically reduced reaction time for defenders and increased the surprise factor of bombing runs, particularly during the night raids of the London Blitz. The Allies desperately needed a passive, non-radar-dependent solution that could deny the enemy access to this critical, safe zone below 5,000 feet. The concept of the barrage balloon was radical in its simplicity. Speed is negated by physical presence. Since Britain could not afford thousands of specialized anti-aircraft guns or maintain a 24/7 fighter patrol over every major city, the idea was to create an area denial weapon. A giant, static object attached to a long steel cable creates a passive, inexpensive invisible wall. A bomber would be either forced to ascend into the deadly effective range of flak, or risk tearing its wings apart on the cable, a death sentence for any aircraft. The design was rooted in the early 20th century. Before World War II, balloons were mainly used for observation or as static kite-like defenses, but the wartime version was far more sophisticated. Engineers designed the balloon to be aerodynamically stable, allowing it to maintain altitude and position even in high wind. The balloon's iconic, squat kite shape was essential, ensuring it did not wildly sway or tear its own mooring cable, making it a reliable fixture in the defense system. The typical barrage balloon was a massive, cylindrical envelope crafted from rubberized cotton fabric, a non-strategic, readily available material. It was filled with hydrogen gas, which provided the necessary lift to hoist the heavy, 3-ton steel cable to altitudes sometimes exceeding 10,000 feet, though 5,000 feet was standard over cities. The strength of the cable, only a few millimeters thick, was its lethal weapon. Virtually invisible against the sky, it could slice through the wing or tail structure of any fast-moving aircraft. The sheer density of the balloon placement over critical areas like docks, factories, and central London created a profound psychological deterrent. Even if a pilot didn't hit a cable, the constant fear of collision at high speed was enough to make low-level attack runs prohibitively risky. This meant the balloons achieved their goal simply by existing. Their static presence saved countless lives by forcing Luftwaffe pilots to abandon their low-altitude tactics, pushing them higher where their bombs were less accurate and their aircraft more vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. The large-scale rollout of the barrage balloon system began officially with Operation Kite in 1938, well before the outbreak of war. The goal was rapid deployment. Hundreds of balloons were initially positioned around vital industrial targets, military bases, and, most crucially, over central London. This operation was one of the largest peacetime deployments of a passive air defense system in history, immediately signaling to potential German invaders that the airspace over Britain was contested, even before the first shots of the Blitz were fired. The balloons were not deployed randomly. They were positioned in carefully calculated geometric patterns to form an unbroken ceiling or pocket of defense. This density was key. By placing balloons at staggered altitudes, ranging from 5,000 to 10,000 feet, and relatively close together, the system ensured that a pilot attempting a low-level run would have to navigate through an impossible maze of nearly invisible steel cables. The chance of survival was too low to risk, thus achieving the primary objective of forcing aircraft higher. Maintaining thousands of heavy, hydrogen-filled balloons across the country required massive manpower. This responsibility largely fell to the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF. WAAF crews, sometimes working in harsh weather conditions, were responsible for the 24/7 operation of the sites, raising, lowering, securing, and maintaining the massive balloons. This work was arduous and often dangerous, highlighting the critical and often overlooked role women played in running Britain's static air defenses. The heavy lifting was done by specialized winch trucks, or stationary winches. These trucks were vital. They controlled the hundreds of meters of steel cable and were responsible for the safe hoisting and retrieval of the balloon. When a balloon needed to be lowered for maintenance, weather, or to prevent entanglement with Allied aircraft, the winch operator had to carefully control the tension and speed of the enormous weight. The mooring sites themselves had to be robustly anchored to withstand the massive forces exerted by the balloon in strong winds. Running the barrage balloon system was a relentless task. Crews had to constantly monitor weather conditions, especially high winds and lightning, which posed threats to the hydrogen-filled fabric envelope. Furthermore, the steel cables were prone to wear and rust, requiring regular inspection and lubrication. The commitment to 24/7 vigilance was paramount. Any gap in the balloon curtain was an immediate opportunity for a German bomber to exploit, making the maintenance duty as critical as any air combat mission. When the London Blitz began in late 1940, the barrage balloon system immediately proved its worth. German bombers, attempting their usual low-level, high-speed night runs over docks and industrial targets, often encountered the unseen cables. While initial direct kills were statistically small, their impact was disproportionate. The system created an immediate and unpredictable danger zone in the dark, forcing Luftwaffe pilots to become hesitant and cautious, rather than focusing purely on bomb delivery. The most significant victory of the balloons was psychological. Luftwaffe pilots, especially those flying single missions at night, could never be certain if their flight path was clear. The sheer fear of the invisible, slicing cable at high speed led to widespread reluctance to fly below the balloon ceiling. This constant psychological pressure contributed to stress and decreased the effectiveness of bombing runs, demoralizing the German aircrews tasked with bombing British cities. The fundamental strategic objective was achieved. The balloons served as a vast, non-lethal net that forced German aircraft higher. By operating above 5,000 to 10,000 feet, the bombers entered the optimal effective range of Britain's heavy anti-aircraft artillery, Flak, and made themselves visible to searching night fighters. This combination, the passive denial of low altitude by the balloon, followed by active engagement by other defenses, was the designed, multi-layered success of the system. Recognizing the effectiveness of the cables, the Luftwaffe attempted various countermeasures. They occasionally deployed specialized aircraft with cable-cutting devices attached to the wing's leading edges, though these attempts were often unsuccessful and dangerous. Another tactic involved using synchronized machine gun fire to try and break the cables, but due to the sheer number of balloons and the thickness of the steel, these efforts were largely futile against the massive scale of the balloon defense. The main drawback of the balloon system was the inherent danger it posed to Allied aircraft. The heavily defended zone over London and other key targets became a risk area for British fighters returning to base, as well as for ground attack aircraft. To mitigate this, a sophisticated system of balloon apron controls was established, allowing for the rapid lowering of specific balloons or sectors when Allied planes needed to land or pass safely, highlighting the constant logistical challenge of managing the system. Maintaining the specified altitude, often 5,000 foot over cities, was critical, but atmospheric pressure and temperature changes constantly affected the buoyancy of the hydrogen gas. To counter this, balloons were equipped with automatic pressure-regulating valves. These valves vented excess hydrogen or, more importantly, prevented the fabric envelope from overexpanding at higher, colder altitudes, ensuring the balloon remained stable and the tension on the heavy steel cable was consistently maintained, optimizing the lethality of the invisible wall. The basic Mark I design evolved rapidly. Engineers developed various systems to counter specific threat. The Pelican system, for instance, was a design aimed at simplifying deployment and maintenance. Other concepts included attaching multiple smaller balloons to a single cable, creating a more complex and dense barrier. The continuous development ensured that the barrage balloon system remained adaptive, moving beyond the simple static tether to include elements like mobile naval and railway-mounted unit. The most terrifying upgrade to the low-tech weapon was the introduction of the exploding cable. Later versions of the steel tether incorporated small pyrotechnic charges attached at intervals along its length. If an aircraft struck the cable, the shock of the impact would trigger the charge. Instead of just relying on the cable to slice the wing, which sometimes failed against heavier planes, the explosion would deliver a direct, devastating blast to the airframe, guaranteeing the destruction of the aircraft. This transformed the simple cable into a self-detonating proximity weapon. The use of highly flammable hydrogen was the system's greatest inherent risk. Accidental ignition, from lightning strikes, enemy tracers, or even careless smoking near the winch sites, could lead to catastrophic and highly visible explosions. This required strict safety protocols, the development of specialized gas handling equipment for safe inflation and maintenance, and a continuous search for alternative, non-flammable lifting gases, although hydrogen remained the primary choice due to its superior lift and availability. While central London was the most visible target, the balloon system was equally critical in protecting highly specific, high-value assets. Dedicated balloon aprons were deployed over key munitions factories, oil storage depots, and major port facilities. By ensuring that these strategic targets could only be approached at high altitude, the balloons directly contributed to the continuity of Allied war production, proving their worth as indispensable localized protection systems. By June 1944, just days after D-Day, Britain faced a new, terrifying threat: the German V-1 flying bomb or the Doodlebug. These unmanned, pulse-jet-powered missiles flew at a low, consistent altitude, around 2,000 to 3,000 feet, and a high, constant speed, making them exceptionally difficult for traditional fighter planes to intercept and almost impossible for anti-aircraft guns to track effectively. The V-1's flight path was perfectly aligned with the low-altitude zone that the barrage balloons were specifically designed to protect. In response to the V-1 onslaught, the British military executed a massive, urgent strategic shift. Thousands of balloons that had previously been positioned over London were rapidly moved and redeployed along the southern and eastern coasts of England, directly in the flight path of the incoming V-1 missiles launched from occupied France. This move transformed the balloons from static city defense into a mobile area denial weapon aimed at the source of the V-1 threat. Against the V-1, the simple steel cable of the barrage balloon became the single most effective passive weapon. Unlike a piloted aircraft, the V-1 was rigid and flew autonomously. A single encounter with the tough cable would often be enough to snip off a wing tip or destabilize the missile's control surfaces. Because the V-1 flew so low and consistently, the high density of the repositioned balloon barrier guaranteed a high probability of interception, earning the balloons their most critical role in the war. The results were dramatic. Initially, traditional air defenses struggled to cope with the speed and altitude of the V-1. However, once the massive balloon barrier was fully deployed along the coast, the number of successful interceptions rose sharply. By the end of the V-1 campaign, hundreds of V-1s were officially credited to the barrage balloon defenses, a testament to their unexpected power. They became a crucial element in reducing the number of missiles that reached the capital, directly saving thousands of lives. The destruction mechanism was swift and brutal. When the V-1 struck the steel cable, the impact energy was absorbed by the tether, causing massive G-forces on the missile's fragile structure. Often, the cable would sever the wing, causing the V-1 to flip, lose power, and plummet to the ground, detonating its warhead harmlessly in fields or the sea. The sheer simplicity of this destruction, a low-tech cable defeating a high-tech missile, made the barrage balloon one of the war's great logistical ironies. While the defense of London was highly visible, the barrage balloon system played an unseen but critical role in protecting the vital logistical hubs necessary for the war effort, particularly D-Day. Balloons were heavily deployed over the Southampton and Portsmouth docks, ensuring German low-level attacks could not cripple the loading of troops, vehicles, and supplies for the invasion of Normandy. By securing these ports, the balloons were indispensable to the continuity of the entire Allied supply line. The success of the British system led to its adoption by other Allied forces. The U.S. Navy, USN, employed barrage balloons, known as blimps or kite balloons, to protect ships, especially cargo convoys and landing craft, from enemy dive bombers and low-flying torpedo planes. The sight of these floating deterrents over a convoy served as a visual warning, forcing enemy pilots to execute attack runs from higher, less effective altitude. The sheer number of balloons, reaching nearly 3,000 at their peak over Britain, meant that incidents were inevitable. Failures included hydrogen leaks, cables breaking in severe weather, and, occasionally, the balloons simply drifting away, posing a major hazard to civilian air traffic and ground infrastructure far from their original deployment site. These failures required rapid response teams and highlighted the continuous, complex logistical challenge of managing the massive, decentralized system. Despite early skepticism from military traditionalists, the barrage balloon system received strong political backing from leaders like Winston Churchill. Recognizing the system's high psychological value, low cost, and proven effectiveness against the V-1, Churchill ensured the balloons received the necessary resources. For the civilian population, the sight of the balloons was a reassuring, visible sign that the government was actively using every available means to protect them from the relentless aerial attacks. For the WAAF and military crews, service at the balloon sites was largely defined by monotony and isolation. Days were spent performing routine maintenance, adjusting gas levels, and waiting. Unlike fighter pilots, their role was purely defensive and reactive. This routine, punctuated by moments of extreme danger, like severe storms or the very rare enemy attack on the site itself, demanded high discipline and resilience from the personnel running this unsung, crucial part of the home front defense. The concept and success of the barrage balloon system were quickly adopted by Allied nations. Both the United States and the Soviet Union utilized balloon defenses to protect key cities and military installations. The simplicity of the technology, requiring readily available materials and minimal specialized training, made it easily transferable. For the Soviets, for instance, these balloons provided a crucial, economical defense layer against the Luftwaffe over cities like Moscow and Leningrad, demonstrating that low-tech solutions could be effective across multiple theaters of war. As the war ended, the massive network of barrage balloons was swiftly dismantled. The fabric envelopes were deflated, the hydrogen safely vented, and the hundreds of winch trucks and thousands of miles of steel cable were either scrapped or sold off as surplus. The rapid demobilization marked the end of an era for passive defense, quickly replaced by the focus on the emerging jet age and advanced radar-guided missiles. The once ubiquitous sight of the balloons vanished from Britain's skies almost overnight. Although rarely discussed, the barrage balloon system had a lasting, if indirect, effect on aircraft design and military doctrine. The necessity of avoiding the balloon ceiling reinforced the shift in aerial warfare tactic. Future aircraft were designed with increased emphasis on high-altitude performance and advanced navigation to counter such area denial systems. The legacy of the balloon was the permanent acknowledgement by military planners that passive barriers could dictate the flight path and tactical choices of enemy air forces. The principles developed for the barrage balloon system, namely tethered aerostats for lifting heavy payloads, endure today. Modern, non-flammable aerostats are used by military forces for long-duration surveillance and communications relay, leveraging their ability to maintain a high, stable position with minimal cost compared to satellites or aircraft. From border monitoring to scientific research, the core low-tech concept lives on, a direct descendant of the World War II defense system. Due to their constant presence and dramatic appearance, barrage balloons became fixtures in wartime folklore and popular culture. While they were highly effective, several myths persisted, such as claims that they were filled with highly sensitive explosive gas that automatically detonated upon contact. In reality, their lethality rested purely in the steel cable, sometimes enhanced with explosives. These tall tales, however, reinforced their psychological power and cemented their legendary status in the collective memory of the British public. By the end of the war, official figures confirmed the significant impact of the barrage balloons. While the number of direct kills attributed to the cables was relatively small for piloted aircraft, the number of V-1 flying bombs destroyed by the balloons was substantial. The system was directly credited with neutralizing several hundred V-1s, an achievement that solidified its strategic importance. More critically, their constant presence forced tens of thousands of mission alterations by the Luftwaffe, fulfilling their primary role as a deterrent. One of the greatest unsung triumphs of the barrage balloon system was its economic efficiency. Compared to the immense cost and resource consumption of developing and maintaining a single advanced night fighter or a battery of heavy anti-aircraft guns, the cost of manufacturing and deploying a hydrogen-filled balloon with a steel cable was negligible. This low-tech, low-cost solution delivered a disproportionately high strategic return, proving that ingenious, pragmatic engineering could be as valuable as technological brute force. For the civilian population enduring the Blitz, the balloons were more than just a defensive weapon, they were a powerful symbol of defiance and resilience. The constant sight of the silver shapes hovering over their homes served as a visible sign of government commitment to defense. They stood firm and unmoving against the aerial terror, reminding citizens that the British spirit was just as resolute as the steel cables holding the balloons in place. The success of the Barrage Balloon Command rested heavily on the dedication of the ground crews, particularly the WAAF women. Their tireless, often dangerous work, managing highly flammable hydrogen and heavy equipment in all weather conditions, was essential. Post-war recognition highlighted these women as unsung heroes of the home front, whose commitment ensured the continuous operation of this vital defensive layer. The anti-aircraft balloon stands as a powerful testament to the triumph of unconventional thinking during wartime. Born from necessity and rooted in simplicity, this low-tech barrier did what high-tech systems often could not. It changed the enemy's behavior, saved critical resources, and became the decisive, passive weapon against the V-1 rocket. The story of the barrage balloon is the definitive story of how a simple piece of fabric and a length of steel wire became one of World War II's most effective protectors.